Welcome to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, Chief Marketing Officer here at Leadr, and on today's episode, I am so excited for you to hear from Randy Wooton, the CEO of Maxio. He has built and scaled many fintech companies, and so he and Matt on today's podcast unpack the spicy take of how he hires people that have strong opinions. And then Matt and I get to debrief if we agree, disagree. It's definitely full of lots of hot takes. So enjoy this conversation with Matt and Randy.
Randy, good to see you.
Great to see you again, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had the opportunity to be on your podcast, I think it was about a month ago, and we had a ton of fun. And
yes,
right at the conversation, I thought to myself, we've got to get Randy on LeadrPulse. So here we are. So we're just going to dive in. Let's talk about something a little hairy called disagree and commit. And you have this line, which I love. You said, alignment does not mean agreement initially. And then this is it. Listen to this, everybody. If you never disagree with me, you're not adding value. If you never disagree with me, you're not adding value. So Randy, talk to us about this. This is awesome.
Well, Matt, this comes from a document that I was advised, I don't remember when, in my first CEO gig, called Working with Randy. And every CEO, I think, can do something similar, which is like your operating system. And it outlines how you perceive the world, how you like to interact, and what are your peccadillos and hot buttons. And so one of the things I try to do in this is just give guidelines around like how I show up and how to interpret things. And people will get to know it over a period of time, but it helps new executives ramp. And so the thing that became clear to me as I ramped into the leadership roles was, look, it'd be a lot easier if I could just hire a bunch of people that were like me, thought like me, acted like me, responded the way I did, but I was never going to get the best idea. And so the opportunity to increase the overall effectiveness of your first team, of your executive team, comes down to hiring smart people who have strong opinions loosely held. But who come to the table with an opinion. And so this idea of, if we show up and I have an idea, my best idea is never my first idea. It's always going to be my third or fourth idea after I've heard other people contribute. So if you're part of the executive team, my expectation is you're going to be there and participate. I call it constructive tension. You're going to come in with ideas. You're going to come in with data. You're going to articulate what your assumptions are. And then we're going to work through problems, challenges together. And there's never one right idea. There's an idea that you probably think is the best given all the information you have. And then you got to disagree and commit. You got to disagree. If you disagree that that's the right path forward, but it's not in your specific area or function, you make your vote known. And then as we walk out of the room, you have to be able to commit, to be able to support the decision we made. What I hated when I was at large companies was they would talk about the meeting outside of the meeting. That you'd be in the meeting and everybody would be talking and they would all agree. And then you come out of the meetings, happen primarily at Microsoft, and they'd say, no, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to do this. And you're like, wait a second. We just
What was the purpose of the meeting?
Right. And we spent so much money in that meeting to get aligned. And now you're going to go out and subvert it. Or so that's the broad idea, is that you want to create a safe place where people can engage in ideas. They don't feel attacked, but they're going to be engaged in ideas.
I love that. Okay, let's go back to, there's so much we can unpack here. Let's go back to something you said earlier, which I just want to double click on. You said strong opinions loosely held.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Oh, well, it just means that, by the time you come to be an executive at a startup, you have functional expertise and you have a point of view about how to do things. Like I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to know, should we move to microservices and which services should we go first, and how much do we want to allocate to reducing tech debt versus investing in customer escalations? Like, I have an opinion around that, but I want the other executives to come in with strong opinions. And loosely held means like they're not going to get into a death match over it, that they're going to articulate what the assumptions are. They're going to share their data. And if it seems like there's a reasonable alternative, they can let it go. And so for me as a CEO, especially going to that point of like, I may have an opinion around our tech debt allocation of engineering capacity should be 15%. And that's based on, I've talked to 30 other CEOs and they all think that's the right number. My head of engineering could come in and say, Randy, based on where we currently are and what we need to overcome, I need to do 20 or 25%. So I have a strong opinion, but loosely held to say, okay, well, let's do that for some period of time, fiscal year 24. And then we need to come back at fiscal year 25 and test the assumptions again. And if
Yes.
it's still true that we haven't gotten over the hump, well, then we need to do something else different because we can't spend
Right.
25% of our engineering capacity just reducing tech debt.
For sure. Okay, I love that. All right, so talk to me about how you've created a culture where people feel comfortable disagreeing with you then. And maybe the answer is because you shared that doc with them ahead of time. So they knew there was expectations set, but surely there were other things that you did, because I've heard it said that people laugh at all the CEO's jokes, that overnight the CEO becomes funny all of a sudden. So what is it about Maxio's culture? What is it about the culture you've created where people actually feel comfortable not laughing at your jokes and disagreeing with you?
Yeah, I always joke that no one ever tells me the truth,
Mm.
right? Because always shades. I don't know, Matt, you've been in this business as long as I have. I think a bit of this is I always start with I am in relationship with another person. And so I am very explicit about how I am trying to, and relationships are rooted in trust, how I am trying to build trust with that person. We use things like insights profiles to get a better sense of who we are as people and how we show up. We spend time talking about it and how we can work better together. In my reviews that I do with people, I do them twice a year. I break it out into the what and the how. So what are they doing in terms of the objectives they're achieving and how they're showing up? We have a great leadership framework in terms of the expectations for how you should show up as a leader. I give them feedback, and then I ask for them to give me feedback, and I write it all down. And every 6 months, we check in on it. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? Am I doing what I said I was going to do? Can we tweak that? And so I think if you're being deliberate about the relationship and you operate from a place of trust, which is transparent when you can be, because you're not going to share all decisions and all information with everybody. But if you're and you operate from a place of integrity, you admit when you haven't done something or you made a mistake. I think that's one of the other big things as a CEO. You can really demonstrate humility and vulnerability by admitting mistakes. You start to build this trust and relationship. And one other thing I would say is I think it also depends on how you show up in the meetings. So when I'm at my best, when someone's presenting and maybe it's not the executive, but it's someone on their team, I have this technique where I'll write down on a piece of paper. I'll say, as the person, I'll give them the full time. I'll say, hey, we got an hour. I'd like you to present for 45 minutes and then save the last 15 minutes for us to have a conversation. During that time while they're presenting, I'll try to find two things that they did really well in the presentation. I will write down the questions that I'm having, and mostly I'll find that the questions are being answered throughout the presentation. And then I have this little thing, a check mark. And the check mark is the things that I want to give them guidance on, like to go do this. And what I find is, Matt, people they do a lot of work to come to front of the CEO. They just want to give a chance to give their story, their spiel. And so you letting them talk and starting off with, hey, here's the two things I really liked. It may be you like the color of the slides, right? But you come out with the show them a little love. And then you ask questions at the end so that they have a chance to tell their story. Because I know when I've been presenting to people, sometimes I don't even get out of the gate and already the CEO is crushing me with questions. Like, well, I'm going to answer that on slide 10. Just let me get there. And then I get all frazzled. So I think if you set up this context where you allow people to share their point of view in a thoughtful way, and you are thoughtful in your response, that promotes a good exchange of ideas. And so to your point, that helps create a culture where people feel like they get a chance to be thoughtful.
That's beautiful. I love that. Okay, let's change gears a little bit, because you've got another unique take, which is when folks work with Randy for the first time, they get surprised that there isn't a lot of small talk at the beginning of meetings. And I think a lot of leaders do this when they know that there's a hard conversation that's going to happen. They feel like they've got to warm the room up first with a bunch of, how's the weather and how'd your sports team do on the weekend? And blah, 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 blah. So you don't do that. So talk to us about why and talk to us about what you do.
Well, what I would say, it is my nature is I tell people I'd like to build a relationship in the work. Meaning, let's get into the problem, because I love the intellectual challenge and stimulation of, hey, we're working on real problems. And the small talk for me feels like it's just a waste of time. Now, having said that, Matt, I've had to compensate for this over the years. In fact, coming to Maxio, which is a very strong personal connection culture, much different than my experience with some of the other software companies, we actually have the first 10 minutes of every executive meeting, we call it the round of good. And people go around and talk about, their kids, their dogs, their weekend. And I'm sitting here sticking a pin in my eye. Like, this is 10 minutes where we should be talking about the August forecast and which deals are slipping. But it's something that I've learned that for this team in particular,
Yeah.
they really like that social connection and connectivity. And actually, I like it too. I mean, I don't want to disparage it. It's valuable, and if you really do believe that software is a people business and the people is tied to building relationships, it helps remove it from being a transaction to
Yeah, right.
being, especially in this hybrid environment, you don't have time to just catch up, at the water
No,
cooler or go grab a Coke
yeah,
or grab lunch. So how do you create space for the heart to heart versus the head to head?
yeah,
And I tend to always be, my default is I'm going to be head to head in terms of
yeah.
how I build connections.
I do love that idea though of that you build the relationships through the work. That
Yeah.
makes total sense to me. I've learned this that I've built really great friendships from people from work, but I haven't always done the best when I brought friends from outside work and started working with a friend. And
Mm,
I've found the former to be a lot easier. When you start working with a friend, all these idiosyncrasies come out that you never really had in a friendship before.
yeah.
But the beauty of building a relationship through work, I'm sure you'd agree, it's like all the debate and the fiery discussions and all of that, like that's when the magic happens.
Well, Matt, I think you and I probably have similar personalities. So
Yeah.
yes, that works for us. But the
Right.
challenge is there's a
Yeah.
broad spectrum of people. And
Yeah.
if you're familiar with like the insights profile, they're people that
Right.
solve for relationships first,
Right.
not the get stuff done. And so I
Yeah.
think this is part of the opportunity is how do you create an environment that speaks to all the different energies and allows people to show up.
So
So
good.
I'll give you an example. I've worked with people that are extremely introverted. And
Mm.
so they don't want to give their opinion in the middle of the meeting. They want to process the information and come back 24 hours later and have a more
Right.
thoughtful. Drives me loony because I just want to get the answer and get it done and keep moving. But if I want them to have be their best, I got to say, okay, so can you come back to me tomorrow with your point of view? And they, yep. Or it might be the next week. And they always come back with very thoughtful points of view and they've considered things I hadn't thought about. And so where my tendency is ready, fire, aim, their
Right.
tendency is ready, aim,
Right.
fire. And so there's some
Right.
balance you got to get
Yeah.
between that. But I think that's where you build a team of yeah, what was it? Lincoln, who had the team of rivals. He brought all those people together into his cabinet and was just able to foster the collective intelligence, which is what I think as a CEO is the greatest opportunity and challenge is how do you take a group of people that are different functional experts and have different personalities and create this one team that is focused on the mission.
So good. Okay, and then last thing, Randy, I mean, we could talk about this stuff forever, but last topic I think I want to dive into is you mentioned in the past, what I value most is impacting other people's careers and the joy that that brings you and the fulfillment that that brings. When
Yeah.
you think about the people listening to us, the people that want to grow and develop, that want to grow in their careers, that want to take on leadership roles or leader of leaded roles, and then eventually maybe even being an executive or an entrepreneur or a founder, what advice do you have for them as you think about them growing and developing? What do you want to share?
Well, one of the things I talk about is operating at the edge of my own ignorance, and I think that it is, a lifelong learner. People will say, but it's being deliberate and intentional every day, every week, every month to read a book, go talk to a mentor, go to a conference. How do you keep pushing that boundary of what you don't know, so that you learn more? And I think if you operate with that idea of humility and ambition, sometimes people think of it as a bad word, but if you really do want to move forward in your career, you need to be ambitious about learning what you don't know.
Yes.
Um, that needs to be counterbalanced by have some patience. And what I mean by this is everybody, when they're an individual contributor, thinks that, well, I got to go be a manager and then I got to be a director and then I got to VP. Each of those are specific stages in a career progression. And I think it can, if you're too ambitious, you jump into that first manager role and you start talking about now promote me to director rather than thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be the very best
Yes.
manager I can be? And so I describe it as horizontal skill development and vertical advancement. What are the components that you're building on that foundation that enable you to take the step forward to become a director? In my experience, and some people will scoff at this, but I think it really takes 3 years to earn your spurs as a manager. You have to
Right.
hire someone, you have to fire someone, you have to go through performance management, you've got to, set them up for success, coach them, put them on a pip. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't happen in your first year. You don't even know what to do your first year. And so by the end of your third year, where you've had these different scenarios, these different experiences, you can then say, oh, okay, I've earned my spurs as a manager. Now, how do I really become a great manager? And then I think there's a very bright line between being a manager and being a director. Well, what does it mean to be a director? How do you go talk to VPs who can help you understand what a director is? How do you work on director-like projects to demonstrate that you're already directing strategy, resources, impact to the business? And so I think there's this, understand where you are, understand where you want to be, and recognize that it's going to take time and effort on your end. No one's going to give it to you. So you got to build the expertise through, again, books, courses, experiences, and having people mentor you.
Yeah. So good, Randy. I mean, so much gold in there. Thank you so much for sharing. You're an incredible leader. And I'm sure there are a bunch of people right now being like, I want to be on Randy's team. So
call me up. Send me. I always like working with great people. So send me a LinkedIn. Would love to hear from you. And I do think, like, look, the biggest joy I get is out of working with a group of people to solve really difficult challenges. And I'm sure it's the same for you. And this is what's so fun about being in the startup scene is what we're doing, no one's ever done before. Now, I'm not curing cancer. I totally get that. Yeah. But what we get to at the end of this period of time, this journey that we've been on, this mission we've been on, is my hope is people will look back on this experience and say, that was the biggest impact on my career ever. I grew like I never thought I was. I got to do things I never thought I would be able to do. And I was set up for the rest of my life.
So good. Randy, what's your website? And then what's the name of your podcast as well?
Yeah. So the website is maxio.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Randy Wooton. And then the podcast we're doing is SaaS Expert Voices. It's bringing people like you, Matt, and other experts who have a point of view on what does it mean to build, grow, run SaaS companies.
It's awesome. I love it. Thanks so much for being here today, Randy.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the LeadrPulse Podcast, the podcast with actionable insights for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Randy Wooton. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn where he posts all of his hot takes. And if you're looking for more from Leadr, we encourage you to go to our website, leadr.com, Leadr.com, where you can sign up for the LeadrPulse newsletter that we send out every single week and stay updated here on the LeadrPulse Podcast.